We know that science, by definition, is the measure of, I guess, our reality in the most objective way possible, using the scientific method of having a hypothesis and then doing an experiment to test the hypothesis and see if the hypothesis is proven true or false. Now, you can never prove a hypothesis. You can only suggest that it leans one way or the other. Science doesn't aim to necessarily prove things. Science is more about statistics, math, and trying to strongly infer things, you know. There's limitations on what science can do. Like there's certain facts, there's given facts, like we know gravity exists because we can see things fall and stuff like that. Do you know why it exists? That's another thing, right? Like science is good at explaining the what of reality, like what things are, but when it
but
comes
not the
to
why is.
exactly,
Yeah. Science has been proven, like sometimes they've been wrong multiple times, you know, when we believed like the wrong misconceptions and stuff because they could have been off by the smallest minor things, but yet it's still the common average belief that if science says it is, then it is, you know? Because I'm a man that likes to believe in science. You know, I like to see the evidence, I like to see the data and all that. I always am questionable on the data. And it is known that humans make mistakes. We make human errors all the time. So, how, for me, it's hard to believe it 100%.
I think people sometimes take it into an ideology, like science is almost like a religion to some degree. But I think, science has, sometimes has helped, maybe even understand some parts of religion. And so I think they coexist together. There is still, a lot of things that science cannot measure and cannot therefore prove to be truth. And since it's all based off of numbers and things that you can measure, then what happens, about the other realms, things outside of times, you can't measure completely everything. And
yeah,
so
because you look at the basis of science, mathematics is the very strong basis for science. It's almost what science depends on. Maybe not in every single case, but like statistics, equations in physics,
Ratios and all
yeah,
that.
all
Yeah.
of that. So like when you take math and you look at math, what is math? Math, some could say math was something that human beings created and we found a way to make it work. I don't know how, but we created it and it works. Somehow there's a pattern and it works. Or other people say we just discovered math in nature, you know. And depending on where you fall on
and
that, like if math is an illusion, then science is somehow still works, but it's kind of not perfect.
one of my professors who is a philosopher, he was telling me that before, they considered philosophy as a soft
Yeah,
science.
that's where science came from. It was from
And
philosophy.
so what is, consciousness? What is, reality in itself? It's the big questions that philosophers have asked for
Right. And
several
science still we
years.
still haven't figured out what consciousness is, and science neuroscientists have studied it, but they still haven't found the exact thing that causes consciousness. And that, like we were talking about emotions, how do you measure emotions? How do you measure happiness? You can measure things on a scale with science, like weights on a scale or how much chemical is in a glass, but consciousness, I don't know.
Science bases a lot off of math, you know? But if math was man made, for say, because we don't really know if it was man made or stumbled upon, but if it was man made, it goes back to human error. How do we know somewhere along the line they didn't make an error and we're still basing off of most of our beliefs off of their human error over time, you know? That would mean most stuff we believe in is a lie, you know? And like you were saying, you can't measure emotions and like just stuff that we deal with daily. Like you can't measure, how do we know how to speak, you know? You can't measure our
Yeah.
vocabulary by numbers and stuff
Yeah,
or the
well,
sounds we make.
quantitative research uses math and numbers and measurements. Qualitative is like what you're saying, people's words, what people say. So they conduct interviews on participants in these experiments of about like 10 people, sometimes more. And then they do coding, which is a research technique in qualitative research. And they try to find common themes in what these people are saying. And then they break those themes down into a research paper to try to figure out what it means. And that's more philosophical, I would argue, because it's not purely hard science like Jose was talking about. It's not hard science, it's soft science. And the problem with
Yeah.
soft science is like where you're saying, how do you measure happiness? Well, we have like, how do you measure depression? Happiness is hard. Let's take something like depression, clinical depression. We have inventories, the Beck depression inventory that can measure depression. But even going off that, like what I was doing with my professor today, like we were trying to figure out how to do this inventory, and sometimes the data doesn't work perfectly. And so that's the thing about these inventories. While they're man-made, so they're not perfect.
So how are they able to measure, like, there's a connection between them? How do we know that it's just not?
That's
like,
a good question. If you're saying measuring as in like how do we measure the comorbidity of depression and anxiety disorders, then that would be the answer. That would be they get a group of participants in a population, and then they run statistical analysis.
But wouldn't there be too many variables though? Because
that's why even in the psychological sciences, experimental designs are so important, and that's why they're hypercritical. These peer review journals, they look for what you're talking about, confounding variables, which are variables that could influence or bias the results. And so you want to get rid of those. That science can only get so far to the truth because there's no way to perfectly measure happiness. Jose was talking about consciousness. We can't measure our subjective consciousness, because even generalizing is not perfect. And you can't claim that this treatment, because it was proven in this experiment or shown, can apply to the whole world. Like, that's not feasible. I see science as like this thing to where it goes here to here, but everything else outside this, it doesn't even try to answer, like consciousness, happiness, emotions, why, the why behind everything. Like, why does gravity exist? Why does the universe exist? Why does life exist? Where did life come from? And why did life start from nothing,
There's so many gaps out there, especially in the soft sciences. But I think even in itself, in the hard sciences, there's a lot of things, that are still out there, and a lot of things that we just still don't know. What we might consider, woo-woo or whatever, might be the unlock to our problems today. Like we talked before in our previous podcast, we have a lot of people who are very smart in different generations, and so they might have we can learn from those things.